Boom, it's 10:15. Let's do this thing. This is the 29th VR or AR session at this show. What is the matter with you people? Why are you here? Well, we know why you're here. And the idea, I think the idea of this panel as we approach the finale, Lucas Wilson, who's going to do this, is meeting with an A-list director and plotting his next major corporate move, and he asked me to back him up. He did a panel yesterday. So I think we have two tasks today. One is a summative thing. We'll review some of what we know and some of what we don't know. And we have a couple of really good people from the Dirty Fingernails department who know how VR projects are executed. And we will be able to present some stuff to you, and you'll be able to ask some questions that'll help. So we'll do two things, right? We won't try to do the 50,000-foot view all the way because that would be tedious and information-free. But we'll give you a little bit of overview to wrap the thing up, and we will get deep, and as deep as you want to go, on the procedures, processes, workflows for doing VR immersive projects. So my name is Marty Perlmutter, and Victor owes me a lot of money. That's why I'm here. No, that's not true. We're old friends. I've been in VR since 1970. Yeah, there was VR before Jaron Lanier. When he was 7 years old, I pictured a helmet that had dimensional sound and three-dimensional wraparound TV, anamorphic lenses, and brainwave sensors, and was a sensory stimulation and monitoring device that we thought back in that day, we thought it would help us learn how television worked on the eye and the brain. McLuhan predicted a few years before I began my work that by the time we got around to really understanding how television worked on the eye and the brain, it would be such a different medium, and it is now, you know, with progressive scan and high resolution and ultra high definition TV, that it wouldn't operate on the brain the same way, and the tools that we had conceived would be irrelevant. So the work I did was irrelevant. But it did conceptually prepare me for where we are now, and I've done decades of, hey, Steve, yo.
Sorry.
That's beautiful. We got two Steves and an Andrew. We're good to go. No, perfect timing. I was just doing filler.
Steve, how are you?
I've done decades of interactive work, and I think there are three elements that we all need, you know, to go into this business. Some understanding of, from the user side, the user obsession, something about immersive wraparound experience, and I forget the third. So let us begin with the first Steve, Steve Bannerman, and we'll progress down the line. Steve, Andrew, Steve, who are you? Where are you from? Keep it brief.
Hi, I'm Steve Bannerman. I am with Local Hero Post, which is a full-service boutique DI and finishing facility in Santa Monica. And we already have a dedicated VR, DI, and finishing pipeline, and have worked on almost 15 projects now, some that have been all over the board, including a lot of cinematic stuff. My background, I spent 12 years working at Apple. I was one of the early members of the QuickTime team at Apple, so I've been doing the digital media stuff when we were playing movies off of floppy disks. Remember what those are. I have been on the technology side of Hollywood for the last 25 years. I've been with companies like Gen Arts doing visual effects stuff, with companies like Assimilate doing color correction stuff and things like that. So, but now I'm closer to the art, where I've always wanted to be. So, thanks for listening.
And it's a big shop. I mean, he's done big projects, so we'll be talking dirty talk soon. Andrew McGovern.
I'm Andrew. I'm Vice President of IM360. It's a joint venture between Immersive Media Company and Digital Domain. Immersive Media has been around for over 15 years. We originally started developing a lot of this technology, from cameras to ways to distribute and play back spherical video with the military. And it kind of evolved into a lot of private sector applications, one of them being our work with Google Street View on the launch of Street View back in 2006. That's how I got kind of involved in immersive media. I think I was Street View driver number 6. I did all of Eastern Canada. But it really started to evolve into the media and entertainment space. And we did a joint venture with Digital Domain this year, and we're really kind of going out to the market and providing over-the-top VR experiences.
And Steve Fromkin is...
Hi there, I'm Steven. Sorry for my tardiness. So I'm the head of production for a company called 360 Heroes. 360 Heroes is primarily a hardware, software company for live action video capture for 360 degrees and VR. So essentially what we are is, if you've seen GoPros in a little array that is generally blue, that's us. That's our rig. So our founder, inventor, was tinkering around and playing with GoPros and was very interested in, it was a panoramic and aerial photographer and videographer, and he continuously started arranging them, and about 3.5 years ago brought them to market and started selling them. And so to date we've sold over about 7,000 units just online, of primarily a business-to-consumer, prosumer type device. So you stick all your GoPros in there, and you're able to shoot 360-degree video. From there, it turned into a couple of different other products, specifically a media management software, and from there, it sort of turned into a production company, which is strange. But because it's been around for so long, our owner, Mike, kept getting calls, can you help us produce this? And not being an entertainment or advertising content creator or producer, he said he needed help, and so that's sort of the division I run. I field lots of calls and conversations and budgets and productions for folks all over the world who really want to shoot, and whether they're just getting into VR or they've been in it for a while and they want to do something completely different, there are conversations all over the place, and it might not be with our rigs because it may not be the right tool for the job. So we do all sorts of different video, 360 video and VR production and post-production. So we're also constantly working and tweaking workflows.
Great. Good intros, guys. Thanks. So tell us about you. How many people here have some sort of VR project, production project in some state of development? Good. That's sane. That's good news. And 2 people. God help you. But our goal here, you do have people who really know all of the stages of execution of this thing. So when we get done with the hand-waving part, the philosophical part, you'll be able to ask questions about how to actually do this stuff. And that information and these connections, these guys' cards and contacts will be useful down the road. All right, so let's, back to the hand waving. Let's talk about where, in your opinion, is the biggest appetite for VR, if any? Where's the opportunity?
You go.
I could take it. I would say right now, everyone's experimenting in a lot of different fields. You know, VR from gaming to cinematic to branded. And if you want to define where's the opportunity now, you can look at it from where's a market and where are people actually making money, and that I would think is in the branded content space. Like you have a market already set up. You have brands that are looking to tell their stories, and they're looking to drive engagement with their audiences. VR fits that mold very well. It provides higher engagement than 2D video and a lot of traditional digital content. So at the end of the day, brands look at this and they get a higher ROI on their spend with VR opposed to a lot of 2D videos. So there's always that benefit there. And you don't see it with cinematic yet, but it's going to be there. We all know it's going to be there. We just have to find out the monetization.
And the methodology, yes, Steve.
Yeah, I agree. I think entertainment and advertising are always very quickly to jump into things that are shiny and will attract eyeballs for obvious reasons, and they generally are the industries that have the money to do it, and that's good. But so Andrew's right that the way to really get in now is to sort of see how your content and some brand messaging may really align, and try to leverage their interest in getting into VR. But I would say at the core, the opportunity is being a good storyteller. And as much as I really love this tech and have a fun time with it on a daily basis, and probably everybody here does, it's what we're experiencing now is a sort of flailing of let's just play with it, and that's good. But as the space begins to organize itself and content creators start to realize what works, what doesn't work, what is really engaging, that's where the opportunity is going to be created. Really being able to identify how to tell a good story, whether it's short form or long form or marketing or narrative, that will all organize itself as well. But if you're going to ask somebody to commit to putting this thing on their face and watch for any length of time, the way that you're going to keep them there is that you're telling a good story, that it's really good content. That's still going to be the principle.
Steve, anything to add?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's sort of vexing all of us in this market right now is the chicken and egg problem that we have, where the sort of tools and content and ideas are sort of juxtapositioning themselves and fighting themselves. And I think that, what you guys said is absolutely right. Sort of the marketing, advertising messages always want to glom onto the shiny objects, and this is one of the most interesting shiny objects for those guys in a long time. But, it's like, if anybody ever really thought about shipping a DK2 to someone as the vehicle to deliver even a branded message, they'd say, no, yet there's, millions of them out there, and people are already starting to get excited about them. So I think that as the tools begin to mature, then we can start to put mature tools in the hands of storytellers, and they do things with them that I would never have possibly imagined. But I think one of the really interesting dynamics of VR that makes it really different from something like stereo, for instance, is that there's tremendous opportunity for VR outside of Hollywood. In fact, I think right now, one of the most interesting applications of VR is in product design and manufacturing. So you look at every single car company, for instance, it has very, very high resolution, you're talking about 4K, 90 frames a second, VR development environments where the designers actually see the car, every single component of the car, before any of those components are ever manufactured, right? And by the same token, we're now starting to see VR experiences popping up in car dealerships where people buy cars using that kind of application. So why does that matter, right? Why does that matter to us? Why does it matter to Hollywood? Well, I think if you look at this, go back to the evolution of the tools problem, right? The manufacturers of the tools are sitting there looking at this going, is this another stereo? Am I going to jump in and spend a whole boatload of money making tools for VR only to have the environment evaporate a year from now, right? And I think the answer to that question right now is a resounding no, because the tools that are developed for Hollywood VR experiences, whether it's branded, whether it's cinematic, doesn't really matter, are very much the same tools that can be used and applied in manufacturing and all kinds of environments where VR is really starting to add significant economic value. So that's the really long answer to your question. But I think that once the tools begin to get even more and more mature, not only are the people that consume the experiences going to be a lot happier with them, but the storytellers are going to start using them for things that we haven't even thought of yet.
So one of the things we look for and hope for in the room is people raise their hands about vertical markets as opposed to narrative storytelling, which I think all of us would agree it's a little early, except for branded messaging. So anybody here from the worlds of, let's say, education? How about medicine?
Another killer vertical for VR.
Big one from VR, seriously.
No pun intended.
Yes, really, the opposite of how about military stuff? Training for industry. Good.
Yeah.
So in these vertical or specialized markets, dedicated markets, we know whether it's immersive or AR, some sort of heads-up display that overlays information on a real-world image, there's going to be big markets for big real uses. We see it already. It's being used in military training and in the field. It's being used in medicine. And imagine, speaking of the killer app in terms of somebody operating on me, God forbid, down the road, I wouldn't mind having a super high resolution image of an MRI or an X-ray projected on my chest before they slice me open. you know, and that's a good thing. And maybe even further, some video of the very, very best person in the world doing the operation.
Yeah, there's a Lucas Wilson last night at one of the panels here was talking about the first kidney transplant ever done on VR is going to be broadcast. I don't know who's going to get to watch it, but my assumption is that it's going to be to a bunch of other scholars and doctors and medical students. But that, you know, to watch a premier surgeon or do something that everybody needs to learn, or something that isn't often able to be seen, to be able to watch that from their eyes at that level and see what they're doing, and simultaneous, it doesn't matter if it's live or not, that's not the point. It's that somebody's able to watch that, stop it, look, examine, and really see it not in an immersive way that makes them feel like they've done that before. Right? It makes them feel, to some extent, that they've seen that tissue, that the organs and all of those things in that structure, and it really feels it's so. When we're talking about this content, a lot of times we forget that it provides an atmosphere. It's not just something we're watching, it's something we're feeling or experiencing. And that does something in our head, in our brain. It gives us a certain amount of memory, and I'm no neurosurgeon, but there's something about feeling like you've been somewhere, and that is very pertinent to what can be used in terms of teaching, or feeling like you've gone somewhere that you'll never get to see. So you know, these verticals, medical especially, is going to be amazing.
There was something mentioned yesterday. Anybody go to the neuroscience thing in the morning that Gary Hare did, the Fielding University thing? What they talked about, memories being manufactured, as it were. Where, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of scary ethical stuff that we'll ignore, of course, because it's Hollywood. But we will be able, because of the immersive presence, the embodiment, the agency, all that bullshit you've been hearing, to create for people useful engrams in the brain, pathways, so that in a multisensory way, your muscles will know how to do stuff that you've never done. And because of this multisensory immersive thing, we'll be able to convey to people, in some cases, memories from things they've never done and of places they've never been. That'll be as palpable, as real, quote-unquote real, as anything that you've got right now. A force so great it could only be used for good or evil. So let's talk about a job, and start at your end, Steve. Tell us about a gig, one gig, and kind of take us through the food chain. How'd you hit the mark? What was the scariest part? What's the missing piece, in terms of workflow?
Well, I can point. I mean, one of probably the scariest job that I ever did was the very first one. It was, and I didn't even work for 360 Heroes yet. I actually got hired by the music video production company to do a music video with Beck, the recording artist. And it was a massive 360 endeavor, and I'd never played with 360. I was hired as the post-producer to sort of figure out the workflow. And no one had ever, I mean, there wasn't VR. I mean, Oculus hadn't been purchased by Facebook. Nobody really was thinking about this stuff, not as many as there are today, of course. And so it was a massive undertaking trying to understand all of this data that was going to come in. There were 3 different camera positions, on one that was static and 2 that were on remote controlled dollies. So it was again, to Andrew's point, branded by Lincoln Motor Corp, and for a campaign that they were doing, and they had Beck singing David Bowie's, or performing David Bowie's Sound and Vision, which is a 9-minute song that was reorchestrated by his father, who's a conductor, and they had 200 musicians around the outer ring of the stage. So there's 200 musicians on the outside and a 360 camera going on a dolly right in front of them. Then there was a seated audience, amphitheater style, on a stage that was counter-rotating to Beck, who was on a raised platform. And so you had all these people and things rotating, and there was all this parallax issues, and then there was also a 16:9 standard shoot going on at the precisely the same time, and we were using binaural audio. So every camera position had this, and no one had ever really, not no one, but I certainly hadn't, and no one on the crew had ever played with binaural audio. So we were dealing with all sorts of amazing audio issues and trying to turn it around very quickly. It was an amazing job, but once, and I that was 3 years ago. So I'm pretty sure my guess is the license on that Lincoln bought on the music ran out, because you can't really find the 360 version unless you now is sort of Chris Milk was the director, so he and Verse sort of own that now, except for whatever rights that Beck retains.
This, by the way, is an old problem that we've had in new media since long before this show formed, when Victor's older show called the Multimedia Expo. And before that, is so many of the great things, the real landmark things, aren't documented in a form that you could look at and learn from. And you think about, the data rate that's involved in this stuff and the complexity of playing it back. The whole point of being humans.
Yeah, we didn't even have media management software. I mean, we were shooting 6 cameras, and they weren't even the ones that we have now, where all the nodal points of the lenses are tighter. They were spread out further, so there wasn't as much overlap, and we had nothing to media manage. I mean, we were media managing in a sort of DOS-like format.
What a nightmare. Binaural audio gives you location information to your ears. A sound over here is different from a sound over here. It's not stereo. It's really directional, if you will, and localized audio.
Is that similar to holographic?
In a sense, yeah, for audio. Yeah, it is. It is. It's real 3D audio.
So that to me was sort of one, especially because it was the first, and I was just a freelancer. So yeah, it was.
What a great nightmare.
That was fun.
That's a beauty.
Those
I
are
like
always
that.
fun. Always fun. I think there's really 2 that comes to mind. One of them is more on the creative side, and it's the Taylor Swift experience. We worked with Radical Media and American Express, and one of the challenges there was they have an artist, Taylor Swift. She's doing a big transition career-wise in terms of her music. She's going from country to pop. She's releasing a new album, 1989. There's a lot of risk. Is it going to go well? Is it not? And we're trying to convince her on doing this 360 VR experience called the Taylor Swift experience. There's a lot of risk. What is it going to do for a brand? Is it going to turn out well? So really the challenge there was walking her through creatively, how is she really going to tell a story? And working in Radical did a very good job of really kind of convincing her and the brand that 360 VR is really a great way for her to kind of connect with her fans in a totally different way. So she did this. She did the Blank Spaces video. We shot it for them. We produced the 360 app, and it really was more or less a carry-on to the whole Blank Spaces 2D music video, and it was a real treat for her fans, and it was very successful from a project standpoint. 50 million people downloaded the app. It won an Emmy this year for Outstanding Interactive Program. But really that was one of the creative challenges, was how do you get someone as big as Taylor Swift, but it is also, kind of risk adverse, because there is risk in doing this sort of stuff. It might not turn out well, it might, look bad if it doesn't, but kind of convincing someone from a creative side that, hey, look at the opportunity, look how you can kind of tell your story, your brand with your audience in a really cool way. And that was kind of a creative challenge. The other one that was more technical was really the Conan O'Brien show. And we worked with them on Conan VR, and it was a project we did down at Comic-Con this year. And the challenge with the show is that they shoot in the afternoon, and 3 hours later, they have all the show edited, it's up to network for air that night. So when you're shooting 360 video, things like stitching, editorial, post-production workflow tends to kind of be a mess. So what we kind of did is we used Immersive Media's platform, and we did things like real-time stitching. So everything was recorded 4K, 60 frame rate a second, right onto SD cards. It allowed us to turn around 5 to 6 360 videos within a 3-hour time period. Pushed that to cardboard. We integrated it into their apps, into their website, pushed it to their YouTube channels. And overall, the campaign was very successful. I think it was 4 million views off of YouTube. They sent out 45,000 cardboards. They got 75,000 requests from the show. Overall, it was a great campaign, but technically trying to turn that footage around for 4 days in a 3-hour period each day, presents some challenges.
Some challenges. By the way, 1 million cardboard's coming on Sunday to your, all of you New York Times subscribers. Anybody here a New York Times subscriber? Good.
We did the app for the New York Times.
Go, Steve.
So yeah, I think I like your approach of sort of talking about one creative challenge and one really technical challenge, and I'm going to sort of also talk about one Hollywood-related thing and one non-Hollywood-related thing. So on the creative side, we've seen a wide variety of different projects coming through, our facility. Some of them are just sort of more testing on the branded side of things, working with folks like DirecTV and Samsung and those kind of guys. But one of the more interesting ones was a project called Kaiju Fury, which was a short film that was taken to Sundance last year. So this was the first time that Sundance had really decided to experiment with VR. And it's a really interesting process to start at the beginning of even short form storytelling to try and figure out how to use and exploit the medium in a different way besides just sort of plopping yourself down in the middle of a story and allowing you to look around in 360 degrees, because that really doesn't add a lot of value to the story. And so in this case, the director decided to focus on perspective. And so the story is really sort of a typical Godzilla kind of thing where a monster is eating the city and you're sitting there on the sidewalk watching all this happen, right? And so I'm trying to understand how to tell, storytellers most of the time tell stories from the perspective of different people, right? It's not just always one person's perspective looking at something the same way all the time. But in a VR, you kind of have to do that, right? You kind of have to say, I'm going to be, this person, and no matter what this person sees, or what you choose to look at, it doesn't really matter what's going on around you. You're still going to see what that person sees. And so you have to sort of write the story and tell the story, write a script, and you have to then decide how you're going to shoot such a project, right? And so to make it even more interesting, because it was, a Godzilla story eating a city, it was very, very high in VFX. So there were, a significant number of VFX shots even for a short film. And to add even more, it was in stereo as well, and it was 4K, right? And so the pipeline that we had to put together for that was pretty challenging to sort of do it in a compressed time frame, work with a director that had never done VR before. And the director was actually, editing the story and changing the story while we were doing the post, right? Because it was like, well, okay, this doesn't really make sense. It didn't turn out the way I thought it would. It's not like you can go back and reshoot it. You start changing the story in editorial, right? On the fly. And so you can imagine the VFX challenges of trying to keep up with a story that's not even locked in editorial yet, and that's got to go to Sundance. So, but it turned out to be really cool. It turned out to be a really interesting project for a first-time story, and we started to see more and more of that happening now, where the cinematic attempts at doing VR are really focused on perspective, and the perspective of the character that you choose really sort of, in my mind, is the launching point for how good that story is going to be. I'm really, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really interested in seeing the tools mature and evolve so that, some of our greatest storytellers in the world can start taking those things and deciding, how can I exploit this medium that was different before? So, as far as technical challenges go, we did something. Did anybody go to SIGGRAPH by any chance recently? I don't know if you got a chance to go to the new media sort of area in SIGGRAPH and look at what Ford was doing in their booth. I do a lot of work with another company called Silverdraft, which makes Devil and Demon supercomputers. And the idea here, so Ford has a lab in Dearborn where, again, as I described earlier, all of the designers of the cars, they take every single part that's in a car, thousands and thousands of parts, and put them in a database. And they build the car virtually first. And the designers sit there and they say, okay, I'm sitting in the car. Can I tolerate the fact that the gap, when you close the door between this panel and this panel is that much versus that much? Or, when the sun's coming at me at this angle, the way the windshield is sloped really sort of creates a glare that I can't really live with. And they tweak all these different things, right? And they wanted to recreate this lab in a booth at a trade show. And what's more, they wanted to have a motion caption element to this so that you could have a wand and actually pixel by pixel peel back the layers of the car, right? And they wanted it to be a full immersive environment, not just inside the car, but outside the car. So we took one of the Devil supercomputers, 480 core Intel system, and put Autodesk VRED software on this thing and took it to the booth, right? And so we had this motion capture system set up where you could actually sit in the car and look at every single component. You could even look inside of the air vents and see what's inside of the air vents.
Always wanted to.
Yeah, and you could take your wand and you could sort of peel that back one layer at a time. And then you could actually get out and walk around the car. And there were people that actually got on their hands and knees and with a little flashlight looking up underneath the car. I mean, and literally every single part of the car was there. And we were ray tracing 120 million polygons per second. It was all in 4K, simultaneously on a 4K projector and in a headset. And it was an amazing technical challenge to be able to do this and be able to keep up with the ray tracing, but to be able to provide a smooth, you can't do that at 4 frames a second. You make people sick when you do that at 4 frames a second. You got to do that in this case, it was 50 frames a second. So 4K, 50 frames a second, 120 million polygons per second. Required an awful lot of integration, trying to do motion capture and real-time immersive ray tracing at the same time. That was hard.
You won't be able to do that at home by 2020, but
You'll be able to do it on your phone by 2020.
you'll need a home. Well, that's a good place to branch into roadblocks to acceptance of VR, back to 50,000 feet. But just there are many. The impediments to integration of this into our real lives at home, to public settings, and in mobile, where there seems to be some traction right now. But let's talk about that. You want to start, Steve?
So, I think the biggest roadblock is just sort of, right, it's our expectations, right? I mean, nobody ever wrote books about, and when I say books, I mean, no one ever wrote fiction about stereo, right, But everything from, the Star Trek holodeck to Neil Stephenson's metaverse, we have this romance with VR and immersion and immersing ourselves in other environments. And we sort of all have a picture in our mind around how that wants to look and feel and act. And I think that's one of the reasons why on the positive side we've generated so much excitement about this stuff. I mean, to me, there's really never been an example like this where we've had a trend where we physically launched out to the general public really crude examples of the tools, right? Really crude examples of the creative. Because and watch it. I mean, Microsoft Windows is the only thing I can imagine that was that crude when it started and just got better and better and better, right? But literally, this is the first time that I can imagine in the last 25 years where we've really sort of, even the postage stamp first QuickTime movies at 320 by 240 looked better than the first VR experience I saw through the Rift, right? But everybody says they still look at those crude examples and go, "That's cool," and it's cool because we know where we want to go with it, right? And so you start to look at some of the experiences that are being created by companies like 8i. I'm not sure if you're familiar with 8i, but 8i is really cool. I mean, there's your holodeck right there. That's sort of, and I can't wait to give that to somebody who knows how to tell stories, right?
That's number 8?
Yeah, 8i. And I think they're in Culver City. And, that's the kind of stuff that I'm starting to get really excited about. And it's just a matter of the tools, man. It's coming. It's coming, and once the tools are there, the storytellers are going to do some cool stuff with it.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think in terms of roadblocks, it's always a little bit of a chicken and the egg sort of thing. And what we kind of find is, in order to go create this demand for VR, and there is, a lot of excitement about it right now, and, the bar is set very high in terms of people's expectations of where VR is going to go. Now we need to actually get there because everyone's envisioning VR as, the next kind of cool thing in terms of content. And right now is, we don't have the tools, we don't have, a lot of the things necessary to get up to that point where everyone thinks we need to be, whether it's the headsets, whether it's the cameras to go shoot it, the distribution, the monetization, everything. It's still developing, but you start to look back and go, look at how computers started to evolve. People were happy with, 2 megabytes of RAM, or
Megabytes.
Yeah, kilobytes.
Megabytes.
It was before my time. But you look at how people saw that, how computers started to evolve at such a primitive standpoint of, MSN DAWs and that sort of thing, and they saw the opportunity there. They saw how computers and how those type of technologies can really change the world. And we're starting to see that with VR, and people are starting to explore it across all mediums, whether it's content to military to medical. And people see where this could end up in 5 to 10 years, and they're happy with it being in a very primitive state right now. But I think, there is so much interest in it that we're going to have smart people go figure out problems around latency and, cameras and workflow and pipelines. And it's all going to be underpinned by the fact that people see an application for this, whether it's telling a great story in a very new way or, being able to, provide an experience to someone around the world from a communication device such as a surgery or something like that.
Cool. Steve?
Yeah, I think perhaps the biggest roadblock is our patience, or lack thereof, because exactly what Andrew's saying is there's this sense that, well, why isn't it better? Why aren't the tools better? Why doesn't it work for narrative? Why can't it be in theaters? And we just need to remember that it took a while for Microsoft Windows to get good. It took a while for everyone to adopt a smartphone. I mean, a lot of people were like, well, why a regular phones, when cellular phones first came out, and they were like the size of a brick, a lot of people said that would never work. That's not a technology that anyone's going to care about. I'll just go use a payphone. Well, right? So these technologies have to evolve. Any disruptive technology needs time to sort of find its way. And so I think, obviously, there's a certain amount of technological roadblock, but that's going to, just in time, that's going to get figured out. It's our patience, and so that we don't, as a viewership, as a society, don't decide, you know what, it doesn't work. It's not good enough. It's like, because it's not 3D. It's not stereo. It's a completely different thing. It's kind of apples to oranges. Yes, I understand how it was this technology that it just didn't work as well, and maybe it was sort of a round peg in a square hole in some cases, and the TVs didn't work. There wasn't enough content. Like, those are different reasons why this isn't fully baked. This pie isn't fully done. And so if we can just have patience and sort of let it all evolve, I think that'll feel a lot smoother.
Now, all three of these people actually provide solutions today, and they do it fast, and they do it at an extremely high level. So the truth is that every one of these men has worked on the workflow, the actual implementation at all of those stages, those crazy stages of stitching stuff together so that 3 hours later people can look at the views from 8 or 16 cameras, 16 points of view, and make sense of what they're doing. So they're lying to you. I mean, no, but these guys have actually done the stuff. Now, historically, you have to understand, this is not the first coming of VR, nor the second, nor the third. VR started back in the 60s. Ivan Sutherland at the University of Utah built something that hung from the ceiling. It was about the size of that chandelier, called the Sword of Damocles, and it had 2 CRTs in front of the eye. And then there was another iteration in the Air Force in the late 60s and early 70s, run by Dr. Tom Furness, who heads up the Human Interface Technology Laboratories at the University of Washington and in New Zealand and in England. And Furness is the granddaddy of this whole thing. And then there was another buzz in the 80s, and Jaron Lanier dropped his diapers and named the field virtual reality in a Scientific American article in the early 90s. There was another buzz of, whoa, look, and people started doing location-based entertainment using VR. Wasn't wildly successful, where you could actually walk into a place and stick on a helmet and play a game. And that disappeared. And now they're back. But this is for serious now, because Oculus is not a hallucination, and because we have higher resolution, both phones and displays, and because we're seeing how to get the pieces together, plus we got the processor power to actually do this stuff. You got the processor power in your phone to do some of this stuff. Now, latency, when you move your head, if the display doesn't move, very soon you'll throw up. It's a real problem. And there are other real problems embedded in this, but this fourth or fifth coming of VR is for real. Everybody in this audience is content-oriented. You're all makers of or distributors of or exploiters of content. And the burden in the next round of this is on you to come up with intelligent applications of this new capability. Andrew spoke of the branding stuff, you know, that Lexus is looking at this, Ford is looking at this, Nike is looking at this. People are actually doing concrete specific things. Sony, when they put out The Walk, the movie, which hasn't been wildly successful as a movie, had a great immersive trailer that went with it. Wonderful example, by the way, of constraining your options. Problem with immersive is what's going on over here sometimes just doesn't matter. And I'm spending 160 megabits per second or something keeping track of this crap when the story is there where my eyes are pointed. So how do you manage that? That's easy when you have a wire between two buildings. I'm only looking this way or looking down. That's it. I'm not looking up. I'm not looking behind me. And that was a brilliant, lucky example. In a way, you people have to come up with constrained examples like that. Yes, sir.
With 40, 50 years under your belt of what would be considered to be the maturation process of a side of the industry that has not yet gotten the attention of, say, mobile, I'm wondering, with all of the strength of the companies that are out there that are very well monetized or presumably enough to be able to develop this type of technology, is there a rift between the content creators that may want to seek you guys out and may not necessarily have the budgets for work for hire arrangements, where other equity type of partnerships that exist between content creators and VR technologists?
We talked about this, you know, remember this is the 29th session on VR at this conference, and 5 of them along the way have been about monetizing in various ways, talking about, you know, branded entertainment and talking about, you know, tracking advertising and stuff. One of the sessions was about where's the money? And the answer is there isn't really, except in these very specialized settings. Branded entertainment, advertising, and high-end game or narrative stuff. And there's very little narrative stuff, and there should be very little narrative stuff, because it's, you want to talk about dangerous and losing your ass. I encourage you to start a VR movie project immediately, you know, and you'll lose your house in 3 weeks. But these cats are in zones where there's actual work, but there isn't a lot of money pouring in from studios yet. They're stealing money from the marketing departments. They're taking money from advertising. And games and porn, of course, are where money is going to be made. So, you know, there's a reason to swivel your head around in a shooter game, and there's a reason, you know, to do porn in, you know.
Can I have a go answering that? Steve's point about the enterprise space. We've built just what you said, perhaps not quite the sophistication affordable, but we've done Jaguar Land Rover's Cave, and the Evoque was built in that for the first time. One clay model being made for $1 million rather than 4 clay models at $1 million a piece, which is a huge saving. And I think the answer to the question here is that in the enterprise space, the benefit equation is worked out. In the entertainment space, the benefit equation is still embryonic. It's the experimentation point that you made, Steve. And until the benefit equation is worked out, the money won't flow. But when the benefit equation is right, the money will just come.
But you know, we have a significant advantage this time around, and that is because the tools vendors have a market in both places, right?
Yeah.
And so in other you know, technologies in Hollywood, the tools vendors have all just had the Hollywood experience, right? And I keep going back to stereo, and I apologize for that because I was there, right? And I did that. And you know, the cinematic experience was the only useful experience for stereo. I mean, maybe we thought TV was going to get there, but it never did.
He means 3D.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean stereo.
Yeah,
3D is Maya. But anyway, with VR, the enterprise market, it gives the tools vendors another big market to keep going and not just wait for the Hollywood experience to catch up. And so it sort of helps obviate the chicken and egg problem, because Hollywood's really not going to come up with the great experiences until the tools are mature, and the tools vendors are really leery about investing tons of money in tools if there's not a market for it. But enterprise breaks that vicious
And the
circle.
storytelling point still isn't there. You know, the Cameron vision for Avatar, using that technology then, we need that kind of major player to look at VR and say, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take
Yep.
my ideas and I'm going to put my own money behind it and I'm going to make it work.
And giving them a DK2 is not going to really inspire that.
But you really look at, like, you know, the whole monetization thing. There really isn't a game plan right now, but this is a textbook kind of disruption technology. It's disruptive, and, you know, it follows a very clear path, and you can go look through history and a bunch of other technologies that, you know, disrupted specific markets. And it starts off as, you know, it's not as good as the technology it's disrupting. It starts to grow, and it starts to get adopted. That's where we are in VR, and I think a lot of companies that are acting scared about it are going to be left behind. There's a lot of first movers. You look at the New York Times. We rolled out their platform for VR with them. They're doing $1 million into the New York Times November 8th. They're betting big on VR because, as a publisher, they need to, because they don't want to get left behind in the same way, you know, a lot of publishers got left behind in the transition to digital. You got to innovate. You got to, you know, go risk capital on this, because if you don't, you're not going to be the first. You're going to be the 10th, and you're going to be out of business.
And
Go ahead.
to your point, you know, the car modeling is a good example of where it's somewhat of a no-brainer, right? You make, instead of making 4 clay models at $1 million apiece, you make 1, and you have VR that then can be monetized over numerous new car designs into the future. So your investment in that VR cave is amortized, right? Now, that's sort of you can look at that very objectively, and the numbers make sense. The problem is, and somewhat to what all the points that are sort of being thrown around here, is that in entertainment, storytelling is not necessarily subjective, or is very subjective rather, and you get a lot of different opinions on what works and what doesn't work. And, you know, which is why, you know, Marty says it comedically, but, you know, going to make a 90-minute VR piece that is a narrative linear story is probably not the smartest idea right now, because nobody really knows what that's going to look like, and nobody really knows how to focus that toward an audience or how to pay for it, right? So we're way far away from that. But if we can, again, because advertising and entertainment are so quickly what everybody can see that's happening. You know, most of us in this room probably didn't know that Jaguar was doing that with VR. And there's so many other enterprise solutions that VR is fulfilling right now that we all don't know about. And those are actually really helpful to kind of understand that the technology is working. It's just, again, to Andrew's point, we're just not sure how the monetization is going to fall into place because it's so early in the disruption.
And we don't know the narrative solutions. You know, I want to talk concretely. Stephen Bannerman has a facility that does real solutions for existing and antecedent earlier media, and it wasn't a rocket boost to do what you did. I mean, you were able to. So tell us a little bit about, you know, not too wire wrapped, but, you know, give us some details about why you were able to, you know, to kind of port your capability from normal post to what you're doing.
Well, I mean, again, I think that the workflow that we put together for doing post and DI specifically, DI and visual effects in VR, is based on Assimilate Scratch. And one of the things that was really interesting for us, and one of the reasons we chose it, was because it was just a natural evolution of that product. That product was already designed to deal with things like left eye, right eye. But you know, when you're in a DI session, one of the biggest things that you've got to solve for is that you know, you're typically in a theater with a director and a colorist, right? And now one of you has a headset on and one of you doesn't, right? And how do you communicate back and forth so that you can so the director can tell the colorist, okay, you know, this is the part of the screen that I'm looking at, and this is really where I want you to blow out the sky, or bring some blue back into it, or whatever. And so, you know, in this particular tool, they had a really, really creative way to solve that problem, and then they put a little dot on the colorist's UI, on Scratch UI, that could tell where they track the headset, right? And so you can actually tell what the director's looking at as they move their head around, which I thought was an incredibly creative way to solve that problem. And I never would have thought of that, but they did. And so it really kind of overcame that how do you communicate, what's that relationship between the colorist and the director in that environment. And it was just a new version of the software. We didn't have to go out and buy. If we had to go out and buy all new software and buy another $50,000 worth of licenses, that would have been one of those roadblocks that we just talked about. But all we needed to do is upgrade to the newest version of that application, and it solved a really huge problem for us. Now there were other things that we had to be able to deal with in the workflow that it's sort of on the VFX and mastering side, but they were again mostly evolutionary and didn't require us to have to sort of throw or have one set of tools for doing VR and another set of tools for doing non-VR. We really do have a pretty integrated workflow.
And this, I think, is an important message for you to carry away, which is that we're right at the cusp. We're able to do this stuff. We're able to do this stuff without a moonshot. So what do we do? Well, we'll get back to, the biggest potential areas at the end. We'll go back to the 50,000 feet. Let's hear from you. Questions, comments. I know Kevin walking in has got something to say. Please, ask your questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry, Alex Pierce Productions. I've been doing VR production, solely VR production, for about a year, and a lot of people during this conference and everywhere else like, yeah, branded content's the way to go. And my question is really, thinking earlier in your careers, before the Beck, before Taylor Swift experience, etc. I've worked for a few big brands. The example I'll use is Pabst Blue Ribbon. So they wanted to do VR. So we go in and yeah, let's do this. And with all the brands that I've worked with, a lot of them haven't ended up, will go through the pipeline, basically do consulting, and then they don't want to do it because it's the money or this, that, whatever. So how do you, especially again, earlier on, how do you build that trust with the brands of this is going to be huge. You need to do this for your brand, et cetera, et cetera.
Andrew, you want to take that?
I can do that. I think it really comes down to, one is selling them on the creative and the story. If they buy into the story, the creative, that is a really good foundation to start off of. But the next part of it is more on an execution side. It's great, we have a great idea, a great story, but now how are we going to execute on it? And the last thing an agency or an advertiser wants to do is be able to go sell their client on a big project and have it become a mess afterwards. And we've had a lot of customers that come to us in that same way of going, I've worked with this person, we're in post-production now, I can't stitch anything. You don't want to go down that road of, oh my God, it's a mess in post. I really look at, once you get that story, you sell them on the creative, and it's really just working with the brand or the customer in general and figuring out what is their story, how can we tell it, how can VR really provide a one-up in terms of a content experience for that brand story. And then the next side is really providing that level of assurance and kind of history and pedigree of going, hey, we've done this before, and this is not the first time we've executed on this. We at Immersive we've been around. We did our first 360 video in '95. We've done everything from military work to street view to award-winning work from Taylor Swift to a bunch of Cannes and Emmys and that sort of stuff. We're familiar on it. We have a track record of going, hey, if you go with us, we have not only the technology to get it done in the creative, powerhouse to tell this story with you, but this isn't our first rodeo. We've done this for quite some time.
But he, as an independent producer, is asking the question, how does he persuasively go to the agency and say, got this great idea, no question he can get the great idea. Execution-wise, this is going to be the cost, and this is what we're going to do. So the two Stevens, you got something to say about that? How would you, if he was your buddy, he called you.
I mean, I would take, thinking as an independent producer, which I was and to some degree still am, I agree with Andrew that it's first selling them on the creative. Once they've gotten over that, then it's really about proving the potential ROI or danger of lack of ROI. And that therein is the hurdle, I think, for a lot of us, but especially for a smaller production house or an independent producer, because there's not a whole lot to point to, except to say that, I did all of this in traditional media, and it worked. And now, here's how I'm going to show you apples to apples. If you put this money in this way, this is how you recoup. So here's your budget. here's how it's going to go to market, here's the strategy, here's how it can be viewed, here's where people are going to see this, and based on your anticipated, your projected, views, likes, clicks, shares, etc., you're hoping to prove that that's where the ROI comes in.
And Mr. Bannerman, how do you hammer the sale? He's got him hooked, but it's not done.
So I'm the one that's not an independent producer on the panel, but I can tell you what I've seen, and so it's not unlike the problem that you had in traditional media, right, where your portfolio is your calling card. It's what and so if you've got experience under your belt producing projects, you're way ahead of a lot of people. So kudos for that. But I think this is a problem that's sort of in a way going to solve itself to some extent, right? I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing is there's investments by people like Facebook and Google and Jaunt to open studios that are creating content, and they're funding it, right? I mean, Jaunt just opened a brand new studio in Santa Monica on Olympic, and for that very reason, right? To overcome, to put examples out into the field that said, okay, when you're selling your traditional portfolio, everyone buys off on the fact that advertising works. You just have to prove that you're good at it, right? And so now it's almost reversed. You've proven that you're good at VR because you've got projects under your belt, and you need to solve for, VR moves the needle in an advertising space. And I think that's the goal for all of the money that, Facebook has studios now, Google has studios now, Amazon and Netflix are investing heavily in creating this content, and Jaunt is really taking the leadership position too. So if I were you, I'd go down to Santa Monica and knock on the door over at Jaunt and get some of their money.
Well, and also, make friends with, folks who can give you really reliable. I mean, because the other Steve, points out something really, really vital in this sell, especially at the shaky beginning stage, even for a brand that's doing an advertising thing that you can imagine how to do. And that's, what's the risk profile? And you got to the max extent, do that ROI thing, but also say, this is the risk, and we're going to minimize it by working with this workflow. And we understand the cost of this thing, and here are the uncertainty points.
It only takes one really, really viral project to solve that problem. It just takes one, and it'll be here.
Cool.
And I would say, like, in the advertising world, there's a lot of sheep. Like, you look at a lot of projects that come out, and everyone looks at it and go, oh my God, I got to do that. Let's go do that. And, you look at the Times. I guarantee you, we have 5 or 6 publishers right now going, oh, you know what, we need to do that. Yeah. We need to get in there. Yeah. And it's, it's a reference cell.
Yes, sir.
We speak a lot about vision, but what about the haptic part of the virtual reality?
Haptic, anybody want to say something about haptic?
I can't wait.
Can't wait, but we're waiting.
Yeah.
So, back in the early 90s, there was the glove that, got everybody excited, and Scientific American put the glove on their cover, and that's when the words virtual reality first came into currency. And it's tricky, both to represent a hand in the space, and it's tricky to do the sensors, and it's tricky to make it inexpensive and accurate. And latency becomes a big disruptor, for the personal experience, the perceptual experience. I can't say much yet about haptic, although, the new iPhone with its pressure thing begins to suggest there's a bunch of patent stuff. If you look into patents that have been filed recently in the haptics area, you'll see some interesting things. We're going to get some kind of edge detection on our screens, and there may be an innovative solution beyond the glove perceptible inside the display, maybe.
While we're talking about hands, in the session on Tuesday, I presented a video of the way pantomime solves the hands problem, and it's actually by understanding how devices are being handled.
So you should check out his iPad display, Dr. David back there. He's got an amazing thing where you see fingers and you can wave the thing around, and it does, in a 2D environment, it does something really quite remarkable that maps in the brain to a dimensional experience.
Well, and actually, it's a 3D environment. That's one of the extraordinary things about it. You've actually got 3D models of the devices you're handling. The tablet or what have you, you've actually got every Apple device in there. You wind up being able to bump up against anything else with a reasonable model of how the hands that must be supporting it are gripping it. One trick is that you grab it by the screen, and then you know exactly where on the device you're gripping it. But actually, I think this is really robust, and the latency issues and the other issues you raised wind up going away.
That's true.
So it winds up being a solution that's much more robust than optical.
So your thing is pantomime.com, right?
PantomimeCorp.com.
Okay, so check it out, pantomimecorp.com. Interesting, and has all kinds of learning applications that you'll find fascinating. Plus, it'll crack your head open a little bit. I think we need, one of the things all of us are taking away, the elders in terms of, exposure to this stuff. A couple of what seem to be like limiting dimensions of what we're struggling with. Screen resolution, haptic, detection of the hands in the space. We just need to think, as it were, outside the scuba mask. We need to look at alternative solutions and see what works. And in some cases, we're going to go old school being gloves and finger detection and latency issues. And we may go new school, entirely new school, pantomimecorp.com. Yes?
I just want to go back to what you said about the brain. My husband was severely injured in an accident, and his memory was completely wiped out. He's fine now. But in the beginning, he formed memories that were not true. Like he thought he had two wives. That was fun. He kept wanting to see the other one.
Yeah,
And,
that's the story. There you
There's
go.
there's the first VR. There's the VR movie you're all looking for.
This is great.
no, I've been listening for 3 days and not quite getting it, because we're doing a documentary. He thought he was a member of Mossad. And it is all from his point of view.
Oh, God, that's great.
And the memories that he formed physical pathways in his brain.
Yes.
So that if the audience could experience what he experienced, I think it could be extraordinary.
I worked on a project that never got turned into a product with Neil Stevenson, of all things, where a guy is coming out of an amnesic state and we should talk. Anyway, but that's wonderful. I mean, some of the greatest science fiction, I'm sure we have science fiction enthusiasts throughout the audience. Ursula Le Guin, for example, in her old, stuff, and many others, the great writers. The opening scene of much of great science fiction is somebody awakening, literally just either coming out of a deep freeze or waking up, not knowing where they are, not knowing who they are, and then coming into themselves, which is a fabulous way of grabbing an audience. And since our wise folk here have said point of view is going to be key in grabbing people in the narrative stuff for VR, for immersive, it's a brilliant, way of, I don't know who I am. Who do you think I am? And taking them on a story. It's cool. Other questions? Sir.
So as far as like you were talking about motivation, like how that person orients in that space, what's the progress on things like, I remember back in the day, there was like a treadmill thing people were
Oh,
watching.
yeah.
Those kinds of things, how are those progressing?
Well, some of that funky stuff is being used. Please.
I can jump into a bit of that. Well, a lot of what IM360 and Digital Domain is doing on kind of more the movement around a virtual reality space is kind of bridging in a lot of motion capture technology and using a pipeline in where you can put on a Rift and you can begin to move around an experience. We have a demo at the office where you put it on and you're basically on the surface of Mars. But a lot of this evolved because on kind of an application we didn't really talk about with virtual reality was on the film side, in ways in which people can pre-visualize special effects in films. And I'm not sure if anyone saw the trailer for Jungle Book, but Digital Domain did all the special effects. And what they did was kind of unique, is they actually used an Oculus Rift and a game engine to go render all of the backgrounds and the special effects in real time. So Jon Favreau basically directed on the mocap studio with an Oculus Rift on, and he could pre-visualize everything. So the neat thing about that is, it allows you to see very high-end, close to photoreal, more game engine rendered objects in real time, rendered into multiple Oculus Rifts. And it really becomes important because not only can you have that Mars experience, but on the back end with just traditional film, we did a Nintendo shoot a couple of weeks ago, and Digital Domain had a bunch of kids, and they had to hit a bunch of marks because they were doing a bunch of special effects in the backgrounds and everything on the mocap studio. they all gave them Oculus Rifts so they can see actually what the commercial's actually going to be like, so they can kind of rehearse. So a lot of that you're going to see with the Vive and a lot of these next generation headsets is it's going to go from more of a passive experience to where you can start to move around.
Interactive. So the guy from Sony was talking about the Walk. In the Walk, their sort of dynamic, immersive trailer, they have a fan blowing wind. So when you're and the ground shakes a little bit. I'm sure in location-based settings there'll be all kinds of use of physical, things like we're seeing in IMAX theaters.
The future where you go in and is that going to be the next model?
Well, it's the Void, isn't it?
Hell yeah.
You've seen the Void? It's on an earlier panel, which is a VR theme park in Utah. Kevin, you.
Out-of-home entertainment is really where all this is going. I'm not going to use the phrase, but I'm in the woodpile here at the back because really we have monetarized our sector. We're a mature industry, the theme park industry, the casino and gaming industry. In a couple of weeks' time, we'll have one of our large theme park shows, and we'll be showing lots of head-mounted display systems, and you're all going to go to your various news portals, and you'll be surprised about all of these things that you didn't know happening because you've been sold that you're going to be able to buy a $600 PC and be able to travel to other sides of the planet and have fantastic virtual experiences. When in reality, you've got two choices. You buy a mobile phone holster and you get 3D video. Or you pay $1,000, including the price of an HMD, including the price of a subscription to go to a special portal to download your content, and you have to kick the kids out of their bedroom because you're going to be taking that over to start wandering around the virtual world. Or you come to a facility that's down the road, you pay your $15, you go into the system, we give you the best experience that is available because we can afford to have a $2,000-3,000 PC. We can afford to give you a head-mounted display that is unachievable at home. That's how the out-of-home entertainment market works. We're a very small industry. We're an enterprise industry. But the reason you don't hear about our sector is because we're not sexy enough compared to trying to sell this system to consumers such as yourself. So
this is a valid and interesting point that has been brooded about in the course of the show, but not on the panels typically. And it leads to my last, set of questions for the panel and for the audience, which is where is the biggest growth potential, in the business? Is it home? Is it out-of-home entertainment? Is it vertical markets? Where do you? Nobody's going to be held accountable. Stop the camera. What do you think? You could start, Steve.
Well, I think it's, the easy answer is it's gaming. That's sort of the no-brainer. That's where it seems the large majority of this is all going. And whether or not we choose to don a headset and watch branded entertainment, short form, long form, or whether or not those wearables become much smaller and fit into our contact lenses or what have you is sort of to be determined. So I think the easy answer has got to be, it's gaming. There's obviously a lot of fun research stuff that, the Jaguar example is a great one. The Ford is another great one. Medical, obviously. So I say a big to be determined for 5 years from now.
But Morpheus, something like the PlayStation peripheral, will lead the way.
I think for a in-home consumer, yes.
Right.
For an out-of-home consumer, I hope there's a Void on every corner.
Yeah, yeah.
Or city.
There's a huge one that's developing as well, we're seeing, which is training and learning, which you mentioned, Martin. You've only got to look at how popular how-to YouTube videos are. Imagine, which are crude, but they're incredibly useful. Everybody goes somewhere they want to do something at home.
Yeah.
If you're able to do that in real time, in a virtual environment, and do it accurately, think of sports learning as well, coaching. Perfect golf swing. You can model your own golf swing against somebody's a perfect golf swing. I think those things are going to be huge.
I think so too. Andrew, what's your guess?
My guess.
Your guess.
My guess. No, you know what? I agree. I think gaming is, there is a big opportunity there. But at I'm 360 and Immersive, we really kind of try to figure out, how do you really drive that mass adoption? How do you get, this type of content, spherical video, into the hands of 1 billion people? Is VR going to do that? We're not sure. But what we really see a big opportunity in is that whole evolution of it going into VR, AR, mixed reality. We see a lot of potential in a lot of AR type applications that are going to come down the pipeline, where it's going to start to blend virtual reality with AR. It's going to be, a mix between the two. And I think that's ultimately going to be, where the market's going to go in terms of mass adoption, everyday use.
So we're headed to sunglasses of some sort. Some kind of heads-up thing that doesn't look like a scuba mask. Steve, the last word.
So, I think for any technology to be successful, it's got to have broad appeal. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious why gaming has taken the lead. That makes a lot of perfect sense. But I think, I think this we're talking about a fundamental shift in a way that people approach consuming media, just whether it's in an enterprise environment, whether it's classic Hollywood storytelling, whether it's training, and I think that all of these things are inexorably woven together. I mean, it's no accident, for instance, that most of the theme park experiences are completely connected to cinematic movies and tentpole releases. I mean, there's a reason for that, right? Because it's another way to extend a story, and so if this just finds itself in 1 or 2 vertical markets, I don't think it has any chance of success. But I think probably the biggest reason why it will succeed is because it's permeated through a lot of different things. And I think we want it to succeed in a lot of those other areas every bit as much, if not more, than we want to put a headset on and watch a 60-minute movie or a 120-minute movie. So that's where I think we're going to start to see, different areas taking the lead, and everybody else is going to start catching up because nobody has the patent on good ideas. And, I think that's really what's going to happen. So this time we come back next year, and I guarantee you we're going to be talking about stuff that we hadn't even thought of yet. And
Amen.
Hopefully it'll be theme park based, because I love theme parks.
I'll vote for theme parks. And don't forget porn.
Yeah.
I live in the valley.
It's all in Vegas now, man. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's good news for the valley. And the valley has wonderful schools, too. Okay, one or two. Those are separate things. We have time for like 2 more questions. Any more comments, too? So as we complete the 29th of 32 VR sessions, VR supposedly, and AR, although we've ignored the AR somewhat, I think, let's give a TV guide blurb a piece about where we are, okay? I'll start.
Yeah.
We're further ahead than some of us oldsters would have hoped. We actually are on the verge of doing something now for a variety of reasons. And you have skilled people who know how to execute the food chain. There is the beginnings of a workflow. We wish we had better tools. Now it will be an interaction between clients who have creative and interesting needs, and you, creatives, coming up with remarkable, appropriate, and workable solutions. Don't hurt yourselves.
So for me, I think that we have this environment that we all have dreamt about for a really long time, and we have in our mind's eye what we really want it to be. And even though we have really, really crude examples, we're all stoked about the crude examples, which I can't think of any time when that's ever happened. And at the same time, I think we have some significant non-Hollywood investment in this platform and its tools. And so I think it has a great future, and I think that we're going to start to see the acceleration of the adoption. So I'm really excited about it.
Andrew?
I think we kind of have the stars aligning in which we can kind of do something great with a new format. And you look at all the ingredients are starting to come into place. You know, you're getting investment in technology and capital around this space. And a lot of smart people are, you know, beginning to spend a lot of time and money and starting to invest and come up with great ways to solve problems within this market. And then you have, you know, a lot of big companies and traditional platforms that are looking to adopt this. And all those three components are really necessary in order to propel this market forward. So you look at that opposed to where VR was, you know, starting in the 60s, is that those components or ingredients haven't really been there, and they're starting to be there now, which is probably the best tell that, you know, we're on to something that's going to be great, and it's going to be, you know, persuasive, and it's going to be adoptable.
Steve, the last word.
I think we're in sort of that a very fun and crucial embrace the moment type of place where the crude tools, yes, we want better tools, of course, but I think the fact that we don't have the best tools is maybe one of the best ways to teach us what works and what doesn't work. If you look back to, you know, only 15, okay, maybe 20 years ago, when we're still not really sure where video is going, and we're still shooting on 16 millimeter and cutting 16 millimeter and not using Avids or Media 100s or any of the new non-linear editing systems. There was something about teaching the craft of storytelling in a visual medium. There was something to those tools that added something. And once we got into video and mini DV, and there was a lot of that quickly went away. You could undo Apple Z, anything you wanted, and that really doesn't necessarily lend toward thoughtful decisions in storytelling and in the creative process when tech is so simple that it's really just a couple of keystrokes. Are we really thinking about what's best or just trying to hit a deadline? And so I contend that this is a time where the stitching kind of sucks sometimes, and the talent got too close to the camera, or whatever the case may be. These are scenarios that we should embrace and learn from, so that when the tools do get better, we kind of understand the language of the format as it's developing, because it's still developing. And the second part of this sort of embrace the moment is this is a pretty rare opportunity that where this technology is not just disrupting storytelling. It's disrupting advertising, it's disrupting technology, it's disrupting mobile, it's disrupting so many different industries and divisions of industries that it can create a massive paradigm shift. And sort of that's why it seems like it's flailing and it's all over the place. Well, because it is all over the place. So and sort of embracing for what it is in its newness is actually something that can really help us learn.
Thanks so much, Stephen, Andrew, Stephen, and
Thanks.
you.